Last year, the Steam controller was discontinued and went on sale for $5, and I immediately snagged one. Honestly, for the longest time, the Steam controller just seemed like this weird gimmicky thing that Valve kept pushing as the new way to play all games. After a few months of using it though, I was able to tell that Valve was actually really onto something when they were designing it. The Steam controller introduced me to many things I've never considered using before, like gyroscopic aiming and touchpads. I understand the DualShock 4 came out before the Steam controller, and already had many of its features, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. There's a lot to say about the Steam controller. If you want a pretty in-depth analysis of it, might I suggest Neryl's video that he released earlier this year. I can give you a pretty quick rundown though. It was obvious Valve was trying to pioneer features that were absent on most other controllers at the time. The gyroscope made aiming with a controller almost as precise as if you were using a mouse. Many actions could be bound to the grip buttons for easy access. It had GameCube-style analog triggers that clicked after a certain amount of pressure and in-depth customization using Steam input. The haptic feedback in particular was also customizable. Pressing certain buttons, using the touchpads, or moving the analog stick in certain directions could be accompanied by satisfying clicks that gave much-needed tactile feedback. One use case I could think of is binding 8-directional movement onto an analog stick, which would greatly benefit from haptics. Its motors could also play music to some degree. I downloaded a program that supposedly made MIDI files play on the controller, but I'm gonna be honest, I couldn't get it to work. So here's where the problems begin. It had stiff shoulder buttons, a lack of a real D-pad, a lack of USB charging, a generally awkward shape, and face buttons that were just the fuck is this? And then it was discontinued. For those reasons and many others I can't go in depth enough to cover. It was clear Valve went a bit too far in certain places during the designing process. This is not to say I don't appreciate their willingness to break tradition and, push gaming forward in new directions. I just think their execution in the case of the Steam controller was kinda sloppy. Enter the Dualsense. A controller not made for use on a computer. It was made for a thing called a PlayStation 5 with a touchpad, gyroscope, haptic feedback, and whatever. It looked like the perfect combination of, a normal controller's practicality and the Steam controller's innovative features. However, this thing costed $70. It took me a while to convince myself to drop that amount of money on a controller, especially considering I remember a time when controllers costed like $30. I've been using this thing extensively ever since I bought it. Its D-pad is perfectly fine for retro games, though for fighting games in particular, I'm not sure my opinion is worth very much. My most experience with motion inputs is trying to do Soul Steel and Symphony of the Night pitifully. The face buttons feel good, though I would have appreciated if they stuck out a bit more. Same with the D-pad, actually. The analog sticks don't quite have enough friction to them. It always kind of feels like my thumbs are gonna slip off, which I never really had a problem before with any other controller. Other than those minor gripes, the Dualsense feels pretty good. This is an oddly specific aspect to give praise to, but the L1 and R1 buttons feel phenomenal. Was it like this on the DualShock 4? I don't know. They're exactly what I've ever wanted out of buttons. Just superb, extraordinary. The headphone jack works exactly like you'd expect it to. This is completely unfiltered audio from the microphone. And I'm able to use this controller on PC because of Steam input, which makes most of the popular controllers work with almost any PC game as long as it's in your Steam library. You're also given a multitude of customization options, which is where all the good stuff is. Even with just a plain Xbox controller, you still have the option of remapping buttons and sticks, and adjusting response curves with various analog inputs. Moving on to the DualSense's more specialized features, things get a bit shaky, at least on PC using Steam. To start, DualSense support with Steam input is still in beta, though it is in its current state mostly functional. Full utilization of the haptic feedback is unfortunately not possible at the moment. The most you can get the motors to do is emulate normal rumble motors, with surprising accuracy, to be fair. I want to make it clear that what I mean by full utilization of the haptic feedback is not, feeling the texture of the in-game environments. or like different vibrations depending on the gun you use in-game. Features like those will likely never be natively supported on PC. I'm referring to tactile feedback based on what inputs are sent by the controller. Basically exactly what I described earlier with the Steam controller. At the very least, Windows also detects the Dualsense as a speaker, so you can select it as an audio output device and the motors will play music. The touchpad seems gimmicky at first, but I can assure you it kinda is. Not to say there's no uses for it on PC, I imagine it would be useful acting as a scroll wheel to change weapons. Or if you run a DS or 3DS emulator through Steam, you can map it to the touchscreen, though it is a bit finicky to set up. The gyroscope has similar potential for customization, but feels less gimmicky given that the way you utilize it is by just, holding the controller. Also, gyro aiming's great, you should try it for yourself if you haven't. So at this point of the video, you might be asking, why would I get a Dualsense when I could get a DualShock 4 for cheaper, especially when it has most of the same features? Well, you can, I guess. That actually wouldn't be a bad idea. The problem with me also selling you on the DualShock 4 is that I've never bought or used one before. Money doesn't grow on trees, and I've been unemployed since the day I was born. Really, buying the Dualsense is an investment in hoping that haptics and triggers get properly implemented into Steam at some point in the future. Whether the Dualsense or DualShock feels more comfortable to hold is completely subjective. So the Dualsense sounds pretty neat, right? Save for the price point. It's at this point of the video that I'd like to make some honorable mentions. A few other controllers I feel I might as well bring up. Before I bought my Dualsense, my go-to controller was the 8-bit Do SN30 Pro Plus. It could swap between X-input Switch Pro and D-input modes, but I mostly used the Switch Pro mode because that's the only way to get the gyroscope to work. One of its selling points was its D-pad, which felt really good, but again, I'm not a fighting game player. I actually still use this for my Switch, since there's no fully functioning adapter for the Dualsense yet. The GameCube controller might look goofy, but it had a lot going for it. For one, the octagonal analog stick cutout made it easy to move perfectly. I mentioned the clicking analog triggers before, which were pretty neat. And while I understand the face button layout probably couldn't work with games today, it was extremely practical for the games that were made for it. But, back to the topic at hand. As bitter as I sound right now about the Steam controller, it's only because I recognize the potential it had. I see a lot of what could have been in the Dualsense. The last thing I'd want is for controllers to stagnate. Even the Dualsense, which I've been talking mostly positively about this entire video, has its own share of problems. I would actually like to see Valve attempt a Steam controller too. They would just have to focus more on, practicality and comfort, innovate in ways that aren't intrusive. I'm not saying that I want Valve to completely copy the Dualsense, slap their branding on it, and call it the Steam controller too. I'm just suggesting they look to the Dualsense for inspiration. They should look to the GameCube controller, look to the Xbox Elite controller, the Wii Remote, the Wii U gamepad. Maybe they could put a screen on it, that'd be cool. At this point, I probably sound like someone who cares too much about controllers. I bet that, to people who are content with the Xbox 360 controller, I've just been raving about stupid, gimmicky shit that won't affect gaming in the long run. But I can't be the only one that cares about this, right? I know I'm not. If you go into any game's Steam input community, you'll see so many different wacky configurations for, all sorts of controllers, including PlayStation controllers and the Steam controller. Nintendo and its community are certainly interested in stuff like this, Gyro and Splatoon, fancy HD Rumble. When Valve made the Steam controller, they wanted something that could play the entire Steam library. As ambitious as that sounds, I still think it could happen. I mean, obviously not every game, ones that require, every key on the keyboard, you get what I mean. If the Valve Index means anything, it's that Valve still isn't afraid to push technological boundaries. I mean, I didn't buy an Index, can you really blame me though? Still, it seems to be performing really well. Valve could easily, sit back, kick their feet up, and let the Steam money roll in. Lord knows the current winter sale is proof of that. What I'm asking is, what if? What if in, say, 2024, my download of Half-Life 3 finishes, I grab my brand new Steam controller too, and just have a good time? One can dream. Here's to hoping the Dualsense gets out of Steam beta soon. and that Valve gives another shot at making the controller.